Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m, Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 16th of February. I'm Bev Turner. This is Bev Turner Today. Sturgeon's out and the search for her successor begins. Is this a victory for biological women, and is independence now dead in the water? It's been nearly 3 weeks since Nicola Bulley vanished, as two little girls ask where is their mummy. Have the police failed the family? With new revelations. The vital COVID inquiry was meant to start 2 days ago, but it's already been delayed. I'll tell you why and when we might all get some answers. Of course, I need you to get involved this morning. What on earth is going on with the Nicola Bulley inquiry? Why would the police reveal such personal details at this stage? I've got my theories on their behaviour, the police's behaviour, that is. What are yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Plus, this morning, Meghan Markle in a legal battle with her sister, Donald Trump's take on Sturgeon's departure, and the 100% reliable male contraceptive pill. All that and more after your news.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon announced her unexpected decision to stand down. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for a leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, and Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes. A new method of screening ambulance calls is to be introduced in England in an effort to reduce waiting times. Ambulance crews will now review Category 2 calls, which are not immediately life-threatening. These calls include conditions ranging from heart attacks and strokes to burns and severe headaches. Around 40% of these patients will receive a callback from a doctor, nurse or paramedic to see if there's an alternative to sending an ambulance. Ministers have announced an extra £421 million to boost alcohol and drug treatment and recovery across England. The new funding will be given to 151 councils to fund initiatives aimed at tackling addiction and cutting crime, such as recruiting more staff, better recovery support for prison leavers and investment in treatment. The government says it could prevent nearly 1,000 drug-related deaths.
We know that drug addiction drives so much crime. It drives about half of all crime. And because we know that if people get into drug treatment, that radically reduces their likelihood that they will be out there causing chaos and causing crime. And so we're making this big investment that will mean more people in treatment, new types of treatment, and as well as being good for all the rest of us and cutting crime. Of course, it's a path out of terrible, terrible addiction for people who are trapped in it.
British gas owner Centrica has posted profits of £3.3 billion, more than triple what it made the year before. It comes after Ofgem launched an urgent inquiry to investigate the company for installing prepayment meters by force in vulnerable customers' homes. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has called the announcement a betrayal for British gas customers across the country and called on the government to implement a proper windfall tax. Meanwhile, 1 in 3 small businesses might not be able to cover their energy bills from April when the price guarantee rises. It's expected to increase by 20%, and at the same time, government will phase down its support for firms. New research by Experian has found around 30% of the 1.2 million small businesses it analysed will be at heightened risk of collapse in the spring. Labour is promising to recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. The Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper is currently announcing the Neighbourhood Policing Guarantee, which will assign officers and PCSOs to every community in a bid to increase police visibility. But the Home Office claim their proposed investment is only a tenth of what the government is currently delivering. MPs and campaign groups have criticised Lancashire Police for its handling of the case of missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley. Yesterday, detectives revealed Miss Bulley was vulnerable, classed as high risk, and disclosed her issues with alcohol, linked to struggles with the menopause. The 45-year-old disappeared almost 3 weeks ago. Tory MP Alicia Kearns said she's deeply uncomfortable with this level of personal information being revealed. And underwater rescue expert Peter Faulding, who's been involved in the search, says the police aren't to blame.
I still feel so sorry for them that it's been released this way. It should never have come out. They could have just told us on the quiet. Press wouldn't have known. No, we would just been changed everything. I feel so, like I said, the police are getting beaten up here. This is terrible because it's not the police. It's just the comms piece where whoever's made these decisions needs to answer lots of questions. Let's not knock the police. Let's not knock the family. Let's regroup, get together and then redo this search again so we actually try and get some closure for this poor family.
And rare, previously unseen footage has been released showing the wreckage of the Titanic. The video was filmed in 1986, just after the ship was found. The luxury liner was sailing from Southampton to New York in 1912 when it hit an iceberg and sank. The video's release comes on the 25th anniversary of the Oscar-winning film about the disaster. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now, though. It's back to Bev.
It's been exactly 3 weeks since Nicola Bulley disappeared in Lancashire, so I'm asking you this morning whether the police have failed her. Don't go away, that's coming up shortly. But first, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon's resignation highlights the challenges that women politicians face and the need to do more to support them and retain them in their roles. Politics can be brutal, and for Sturgeon, the job has taken a physical and mental toll. Here she is announcing her resignation.
While I am stepping down from leadership, I am not leaving politics. There are many issues I care deeply about and hope to champion in future. Winning independence is the cause I have dedicated a lifetime to. It is a cause I believe in with every fibre of my being, and it is a cause I am convinced is being won. I intend to be there as it is won every step of the way.
But with her strong views on transgender and transgender laws, is her resignation, ironically, a victory for women? Joining me now, social media campaigner Di McMillan and diversity and inclusion facilitator Katie John Went. Good morning, both. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Di, what was your reaction yesterday? I saw you on social media. When we spoke to you in the day, you said that you were pulsating with happiness. Has that elation abated at all?
Definitely not. No, I am delighted to see the back of Sturgeon. She has done more damage in Scotland than anyone in history that I can bring to mind.
But Di, I would imagine, as a woman, and I think it's probably safe to say that you would probably describe yourself as a feminist, it's sort of heartbreaking for us, isn't it, to see a woman that's been at the top of her political game for 8 years step away and other women rejoicing. Just reflect on that paradox a bit for me.
So, yeah, I absolutely see where, yes, it's a loss to women that we find ourselves losing such a strong and capable leader. However, she's not the right one. She's just not the right one. I think that where women's rights are concerned, we've been crushed, is what's happened on the back of her ideological stance on transgenderism, where the emotions of men have been put ahead of the real and tangible rights and safeguarding issues where women and children are concerned.
She was at pains, Di, to say yesterday that it isn't the short-term attention and controversy around this issue which has caused her to walk away from this powerful position, but that she'd been reflecting on this for much longer. Do you believe that, or do you think she's been a victim of this gender ideology?
I think she's had a bit of a doing for quite a long time. I think that many of the things that she's been up to of late have brought this catastrophically to her lap. The issue with Alex Salmond, for example, and the questioning that she had in Holyrood, where she just simply could not remember. Now, I believe that she said, I can't remember something about 75 times within that questioning line. Now, my mum had dementia and she would have been able to remember some of that stuff. Do you know, it's just absolute garbage, and she has utterly brought this situation upon herself.
Katie, let me come to you. Your thoughts on the resignation yesterday. You must have been fairly disappointed, I imagine.
Well, you know, many trans people are disappointed by it, and so are also many Scottish people. I don't think anybody speaks for all women or all Scottish people. I'm not Scottish, first off, apologies for that. Spent a lot of time in Scotland, nor am I a person born female, so I can't speak for women in that sense of the word. But I do know a lot of people, and I've spoken to people overnight, saying they are disappointed by it, not only for the fact that it's a kind of a dent in progression. I don't think it's necessarily standing on gender ideology, but it's Nicola Sturgeon did stand for progression in Scotland, did stand for social progressive views. And just like Jacinda Ardern, there's been a catastrophic loss of a brilliant leader who is respected in many respects the world over, more so than our leaders in Westminster. But is it a loss for trans and a victory for women? No, it's a loss for some trans and a loss for many women. I don't think it's exclusive across the board. And if front female runner, say Kate Forbes, becomes First Minister, then we'd have someone with strong conservative Christian views on things like abortion and equal marriage, which could potentially see Scotland's progressive social views take a step backwards. On trans, I do believe she was a good ally, but perhaps someone who allied too far, and it became the hill she died upon, almost like the poll tax moment for Thatcher. But it could instead have been that kind of, with Westminster using Section 35 to try and crush the gender recognition bill, even if that were to die or be reformed and rethought, and personally I had mixed views on it anyway, nevertheless, it could have been kind of an independence moment when Scotland actually said, Westminster, stop going against us. And that would have been a victory for Scotland and for women.
Di, let me bring you back in then. It's an interesting take on it, isn't it? That perhaps the next leader of the SNP, if it is Katie Forbes, we're going to be talking about this a bit later in the show this morning as well. If she does replace Sturgeon, she might have some views that a lot of women may not see as being pro-women and pro-choice. Could it possibly have been better the devil you know?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I think that whether it's Katie Forbes or any of the other amazing women from the SNP party, now I'm not against the SNP, neither am I for them. What I am against is their ideas that we should be dictated to in a way that is I suppose the thing about it is that this woke ideology is it's a faux ideology, it's their moral superiority and judging of people who don't have similar ideas is where normal people feel that this is wrong. You know, we shouldn't be forced in any way to do anything, whether it's to accept biological males in our private spaces, in our women's refuges, or any of these kind of things. There are lines where your average woman is concerned that should not be crossed.
Katie, what do you make of that? Because I think Di speaks for a lot of people that this debate felt as though it was anti-biological women as opposed to pro-trans choice.
I think it's one of the classic things that's been going on for the last 4 years or more. It's been a very volatile debate, and where there should have been a debate, there was no debate. And where the debate did happen, it was vociferous and partisan and extreme. And there were very few kind of moderate voices saying that, are there ways to progress things such as trans safety and trans rights? I mean, we've had the trans teenager who was killed last week, but infinitely more women are killed on a daily basis. So, we can't just exaggerate that out of proportion. But there must be ways of having sensible debate. And in this respect, Nicola was sensible. And to a degree, so is Kate Forbes. She is a proponent of decent debate. And that I respect. And her own father was a missionary. My own background includes me being a missionary in my background. So I do respect the need for good debate. And there has to be ways to come together and dialogue. And this is maybe where the gender recognition kind of rethink didn't work properly, is that the rethinks and the conversations didn't include all of the voices, because there must be ways to progress trans safety and trans rights without treading on women's safety and women's rights. There must be ways to expand the cake rather than taking from somebody else's slice. And in that sense, despite being male born, I'm absolutely a feminist and do not believe in trampling on women's rights, but I do believe in having respectful conversations. And head held high, trans people haven't been doing that. Equally, some women haven't, but we have to bang heads and get around the table.
Di, I think Katie has a point, doesn't she, in that this needs to be a conversation which is had, but it has felt all too often, particularly when Nicola Sturgeon was pressed on these issues, that it was a fait accompli, that the conversation had been had, that she was right and the gender recognition reform bill had to go through. And now, what happens to that, Di? What would you like to see happen? Obviously, Westminster are blocking that at the moment.
So I think that I agree entirely that there should have been open and fair debate and conversation on the subject, where we biological women would not have felt that we were being taken from or put upon. I think that, for example, I was in George Square last Sunday where there was a Let Women Speak event. Now, the trans activists had put on their own karaoke event to drown out the women's voices. Now, these women were talking about having been sexually assaulted and raped. They were talking about being in prison with biological men, the fear that they had felt in that situation. And you at the other end of the square had people singing and dancing to ABBA and, that kind of seriously disrespectful nonsense. These women have a right to speak and discuss the things that the trans ideology kind of stuff is, how it's impacting them in their lives.
Absolutely. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Di Macmillan there and Katie John Went. It's interesting, isn't it? I was cancelled by some trans activists. I was due to speak at a legal firm on International Women's Day, but because I had retweeted an article in a national newspaper written by somebody that they didn't like, I got cancelled from that. Let me know your thoughts at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Still to come, it is 3 weeks today since Nicola Bulley vanished. There are 2 little girls who need to know when mummy is coming home. Have the police failed them? Don't go anywhere.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Lots of cloud around today. The winds are going to be the big feature of the weather tonight and particularly tomorrow morning across parts of the north. We have Met Office yellow warnings in place. That's because of this area of low pressure deepening, intensifying as it moves to the north of Scotland. Look at the squeeze and the isobars. Those winds really picking up, especially through Friday morning. More on that in a moment. Let's get through the rest of today. As I said, a lot of cloud out there. Some drizzly conditions over parts of eastern England, clearing away, the odd spot of drizzle elsewhere, but also something a bit brighter developing. Parts of East Wales, North East England may well see some sunny spells before more rain pushes back into Northern Ireland. It's pretty mild out there today, double digits almost across the board, and with a bit of brightness we could get into the teens. During this evening, that rain is going to spread from Northern Ireland into western Scotland, where it will last all night. The rain getting heavier and heavier through the night as that low pressure moves in. The winds also then steadily increasing, really picking up after midnight across the northwest. Further south, well, it'll get a bit breezy. It stays cloudy. Look at these overnight temperatures, very mild indeed. We won't feel mild tomorrow in the winds. Now, those winds really whipping up tomorrow morning across Scotland initially, but also down across parts of northern England. Gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, likely to cause some disruption, particularly for high-sided vehicles, but could all cause some flying debris, certainly some disruption to the transport networks. Planes, flights may be cancelled. So very blustery day across the north with showers in the far north. Again, further south, many places just dry and cloudy, but it will be windier than today. And we could at times see a little bit of rain in the southwest. Another very mild day across the south. Further north, it will be a colder day, despite a bit more sunshine, but obviously feeling a lot colder with those winds. Now, those winds will be easing through the afternoon and into the evening. A bit more rain coming into the northwest as we go through Friday evening. More details on the weather warnings on the Met Office website. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Bev Turner Today on GB News. Still to come this morning, this time 3 weeks ago, this very moment, pretty much 3 weeks ago, the family of Nicola Bulley started to wonder why she hadn't come home from her normal dog walk. They still have no answers. I've got a former top cop and psychologist to examine the very latest on that. But first, I'm joined by former special advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, and the chair of the Republican Overseas UK, Greg Swinson. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this morning.
Good to be here, Beth.
We have got some of the best paper stories today. We're going to go through them at a rate of knots. Right, Greg. Donald Trump, of course, couldn't resist saying a nice, fond, warm farewell to Nicola Sturgeon as she went out the door. This was read out, this statement, for the first time last night on GB News with Nigel Farage. That's who Donald Trump got in touch with. And of course, he said that Ms. Sturgeon, fought me all the way over the golf courses. This crazed leftist symbolises everything wrong with identity politics. I mean, tell us what you really think, Donald Trump, right? He said Sturgeon thought it was OK to put a biological man in a woman's prison. If that wasn't bad enough, she fought for a gender recognition reform bill that would have allowed 16-year-old children to change their gender without medical advice. He did not hold back on why. Are you surprised by that, Greg?
Not at all. Not at all. As we know, President Trump is very unfiltered, is probably an understatement. But he also, going back to 2015, he says what people are thinking. He's just a lot more candid about it than most politicians or all politicians. So he's just saying what people are thinking. And then he brings the personal into it, too, as usual for President Trump, and that with the golf courses. So he couldn't just leave it at, her public stance on gender issues. He had to bring in a personal conflict. So that's not the first time for President Trump, not the last.
And of course, he didn't just talk about his golf properties. He talked about the fact that he built the greatest golf properties in the world in Scotland. Charlie, does that make you a little bit nostalgic for Donald Trump when you see a statement like this?
Well, as you say, he pulls no punches. That's what he really thinks. And maybe we should just have an away day to this golf course to see if it really is the greatest. But I think, look, if you rattled the Donald, then I think it shows some of Nicola's strengths, actually, that she was a formidable politician. She was a thorn in his side. She's been in the thorn of many politicians' sides south of the border in Westminster. So she has a great record as a politician. I think it is a huge loss and a huge blow to the SNP because whoever succeeds Nicola Sturgeon will have big, big shoes to fill. And it does put the case for independence, I think, slightly on the back foot.
Yeah. Has she just won the election for Keir Starmer by stepping down, do you think?
Well, they've got a lot of work to do, Labour, in Scotland. They've only got one MP still, so huge amount to do. And I think, look, the SNP will now go through weeks, potentially months of infighting to see who's going to succeed Nicola, when actually Scotland needs to focus on things like education, health, tackling drug issues and crime, things that really, really matter to voters.
Well, it's funny you should say that because actually Kenny, one of our viewers, has got in touch and said, why is everybody praising Sturgeon, seeing as education, drugs, NHS and the police have all been ruined? If we look at the runners and riders who might be set to replace her, gentlemen, John Swinney, Angus Robertson, Kate Forbes, Humza Yousaf and Joanna Cherry. Are you familiar with any of those people, either of you?
No.
None?
None.
Only
Charlie, you worked in Westminster for years. How can you not? And you don't know any of these people?
I've heard of them. I mean, we do know them, but they won't be household names to anyone that isn't inside the bubble. And I think that just shows just how great Nicola was. And as I say, these are big shoes to fill. But like Rishi Sunak, who was appointed Chancellor after the resignation of Savage Javid all those months ago, who then obviously had a huge following because of the role that he held. There might be an opportunity, whoever takes over from Nicola, to be able to quickly get that following that they need to take the SNP forward.
It does show, though, what a dominant force she's been in Scottish politics for 8 years, that everybody is cast in the shade of her.
Absolutely. And there was no one pushing her out in this during her resignation. That was yesterday. That was pretty obvious that there was no internal conflict
Yeah.
in the S&P. So I think it just, again, as Charlie said, it shows how dominant she was and still is. So, but, you know, someone will fill those shoes. And you see this in the U.S. as well. Nobody heard of Barack Obama before 2004, and he's still a massive force in American politics. And someone will come around and they'll be on the front page.
Yeah. OK, right, guys, let's move on to this story that broke this morning. I mean, we're living in a country right now where there was one pensioner the other day talking about the fact that she doesn't make toast in the morning anymore because she doesn't want to turn on the electricity bill. She can't afford the electricity bill. And Charlie, British gas owner Centrica has just announced record profits of £3 billion, up from 948 million in 2021. How is that OK?
Well, it's not. I think you're absolutely right. There'll be people across the country who are picking their jaw off the floor, who haven't been able to afford their bills. The government has stepped in. It's important to say, to support people with the cost of living crisis, particularly on their energy bills, when we saw those energy bills soar.
But that money's coming out of our tax. We're paying the government, and they're basically giving us a little bit back. They won't from April to cover this. Shouldn't there be a windfall tax on Centrica?
Well, I think that there's already a windfall tax in place, but the question is, can it go further, particularly when you hear news stories like today, as you rightly say, 3 billion in excess of profits. What one hopes is that actually at some point that, Centrica can pass on those profits to its consumers, but also make sure that it's actually investing in renewable energy or new sources of energy for the future to make sure that actually we're not depending on oil or gas from Russia.
This will be going to the shareholders, though, Greg.
It will be, but this shows the folly of government intervention in what should be private markets. So I'm definitely against a windfall tax. What's happened is the government's caps on retail prices are mismatched with the free, the open wholesale prices. But look what the disruptions are to the market, right? They've capped retail, or at least they're subsidizing, which is really just shifting it from consumers to taxpayers. But the fracking ban, the windfall taxes, the hostility to the private sector in general, but especially to the energy sector, that's created this problem. So I don't blame, British Gas for making some money. This is the same thing as, you saw Exxon and BP's profits in the last few weeks. This is what happens when the government overregulates a market. And these are the unintended consequences, or perhaps intended consequences. So unleash the private sector, unleash the ban on fracking, stop capping retail prices, and let the markets work.
What do you think about that, Charlie? Do you agree?
Well, I think it is important to make sure that the markets work, as I said before, to allow big companies to then go and invest in, as I say, other sources of energy. But you do hope that at a time where everybody is suffering, where there is a huge cost of living crisis is in place, that you hope that any company that is earning excessive profits, that they do pass those back onto the consumer in the long term. And we hope that might be the case here.
Best thing to do is bring competition in, or let the market compete. And that's why they're able to charge high prices, because so many of their competitors went out of business. Why did they go out of business? Because of money printing, because of hostility to the supply side. So when the wholesale prices, they love to blame the invasion of Ukraine on this. Wholesale prices were up fivefold before the invasion. 2021 is when these competitors to British Gas started going under because of government intervention into the markets.
Yeah. I can't have you here, actually, without mentioning the accusation from the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist that Joe Biden had something to do with the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up. Obviously, the White House have denied it vociferously.
It was an excellent piece. If it was fiction, it was great fiction. Yeah. He should be a novelist. But it was hard to argue with a lot of his research and a lot of his arguments. So, who knows? I mean, of course, the White House is going to deny it, but it's, who else could have possibly done this? So there's some merit to it, I think.
OK, right. Thanks, guys. Up next, missing mother Nicola Bulley, still not found after 3 weeks. Have the police failed her? That's after the news.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. Here's your top stories at 10:31. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon announced her decision to stand down after 8 years in the job. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for a leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister John Swinney and Finance Secretary Kate Forbes. A new method of screening ambulance calls is to be introduced in England in an effort to reduce waiting times. Ambulance crews will now review Category 2 calls, which are not immediately life-threatening. These calls include conditions ranging from heart attacks and strokes to burns and severe headaches. Around 40% of patients will receive a call back from a doctor, nurse or paramedic to see if there's an alternative to sending an ambulance. Ministers have announced an extra £421 million to boost alcohol and drug treatment and recovery across England. The new funding will be given to 151 councils to fund initiatives aimed at tackling addiction and cutting crime, such as recruiting more staff, better recovery support for prison leavers and investment in treatment. The government says it could prevent nearly 1,000 drug-related deaths. British gas owner Centrica has posted profits of £3.3 billion. That's more than triple what it made the year before. It comes after Ofgem launched an urgent inquiry to investigate the company for installing prepayment meters by force in vulnerable customers' homes. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has called the announcement a betrayal for British gas customers and called on the government to implement a proper windfall tax. And Labour is promising to recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers in a bid to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. Speaking in the last few minutes, the Shadow Home Secretary condemned a complete collapse of Home Office leadership on crime and policing under the Conservatives. Yvette Cooper also unveiled Labour's proposed neighbourhood policing guarantee, which would assign PCSOs to every community in a bid to increase police visibility. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Bev will be back with you in just a moment.
Before 11, Elon Musk says a single world government could lead to the end of civilization. He said it at the World Government Summit. Be back with you in 2. We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. It is 10:37. Still to come, are we now a Britain united? I hope so. Is Sturgeon's resignation the end of the independence dream for the SNP? But first, it's been 21 days since the disappearance of Nicola Bulley. Police said she had significant issues with alcohol, which was brought on by her ongoing struggles with menopause. Detectives say the 45-year-old was listed as a high-risk missing person due to a number of what they called at the time specific vulnerabilities. But have the police done enough, or have they failed Nicola? Joining me now is former Met Detective Peter Blexley and the psychologist Emma Kenny. Good morning, both. Great to see you. Peter, you have an expert assessment on how this investigation has been going. We're 21 days in. It looks like they've got no more answers. Is this looking to you like a disastrous investigation?
Well, in terms of Lancashire's constabulary communication with both the media and the public, it has been absolutely woeful. Every time they've stridently said, don't speculate during a press conference, all they've done is open the doors for people to do exactly that by their clumsy use of language and their miscommunications. And of course, yesterday was the primest example of that.
So could it be, Peter, that they have done the right things, they've been looking in the right places, but they haven't messaged it correctly to the public?
Quite possibly, although a lot of people reasonably are saying, why are they so wedded to this idea that Nicola went in the water? Because they are still yet to give us the evidence to tell us what it is that made them so convinced that that was their primary strategy. And remember, yesterday, they once again said there is no evidence of any criminal activity or any third-party involvement.
Emma Kenny, here's my theory. It's not about what's happened to Nicola, because I think it's completely inappropriate to speculate about that. But my theory of what might have happened with the police is that perhaps she has these notes on her record that they visited the home in January. We don't know the details of that particular visit by effectively a social worker, a community support officer, and perhaps the police. And from there, perhaps they've made an assumption. This is clearly somebody who was in a position to take her own life, and they've just focused on the river. The detail they announced yesterday about the drinking and the menopause, for me, was nothing short of extraordinary and shocking. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I'd mirror that, because there's 13 million women on average going through the menopause in the UK at this moment in time. And a lot of those will, for example, drink a little more than usual and feel more vulnerable, and they're not just disappearing every single day. There would be a whole deficit in our population if that were the case. But I think that it's helpful for the police to be able to hang on to that, so that some of, as was just noted, the failures that I do think the speculation have started to actually have some reasonable explanation for, such as they didn't cordon off the area and so on and so forth. And there are lots of things that I've listened to where police officers have come out and talked about that from their prior experience. And I'm afraid that I do think what they're trying to do is deflect a little bit. And it's just not read the room at all, Bev, because what we know is there is a woman missing, irrespective of whether there were vulnerabilities, which we all have with respect. She's missing. And the primary focus is, how do we bring her home? Not how do we take highly confidential information and exploit that to our benefit. And that's what people are feeling. I have a father who took his own life. I'm very aware that when people go missing, they have to be clear about vulnerabilities. Fine. Well, that didn't happen a few weeks ago. That wasn't expressed. This is a latter explanation for behaviours that I think come down to failures.
Peter, it seems obviously the police knew at the beginning of this investigation that these notes were in the history of that particular family. Do you think it might have affected how they treated it? Or should they have gone maybe public with that earlier? The professional diver who was brought onto the scene to help said he didn't even know about that. He was talking on breakfast on GB News this morning, saying if you'd given me that information, I would have looked for her in a different way.
Clearly, there's been an attempt to suppress this information, which is astonishingly naive. The family must be talking to the police, and I would strongly suspect that the police have been trying to give them some advice with regards to the media. Well, my advice would be never take any media advice from Lancashire Constabulary, because if this is an example of their work, they clearly don't know very much at all about how to handle information, when to divulge it, what to divulge, and of course, if you don't trust the messaging, you're not going to trust the investigation.
Emma, that word trust is absolutely critical here, isn't it? In your experience, you've worked with families, as you say yourself, you very sadly lost your father to this, to suicide. I imagine that the relationship between the family and the police officers who will be in and out of their house at this time is absolutely critical.
It's paramount, and I do feel that the family and the friends have had some real frustrations from the get-go. When you have a human being in your world that is just the most priceless individual and they're lost, they've disappeared, and the reality is there is no explanation. You know, she could have drowned, she could have taken her own life, she could have been abducted. These are all possibilities, and yet it feels like there was a bias. And we all know about psychological bias, confirmation biases. I believe this, I need to confirm it. The problem with that is the police's job, as was just absolutely accurately described, is to essentially look at all avenues of investigation, to close nothing off, and also forensically to be on high alert. And I think that the public, as much as there's a lot of criticism about people making these assumptions and armchair detectives, it comes down to something when those armchair detectives are actually talking about police protocol that is essentially factual and correct, and that seems to have been, shall we say, not necessarily in line where this investigation has been concerned.
Peter, some people are now speculating, with hope actually, and it's the optimistic assessment might be that Nicola just decided in a state of mental crisis that she could no longer live this life and has escaped. She's gone somewhere. How likely is that?
Well, the police have told us that there is a pathway up towards Garstang Road, which they cannot be 100% convinced that Nicola hasn't passed through that way because there's not sufficient CCTV. So there is always the possibility that their working hypothesis, their theory that Nicola went into the water might not actually be what actually happened. But we shall have to wait and see. Of course, everybody longs for a satisfactory resolution to this, but sadly, as time goes on, I think that more and more unlikely.
What would you be doing now, Peter, if you were in charge of this investigation now? I know you would have done things differently perhaps from day one, but if you were to step into this now, what would your strategy be?
Well, having sacked the media team this morning, which would have been the first thing to do if I ruled the Lancashire Constabulary, I would once again be trying to put the genie back into the bottle in certain regards in trying to regain public confidence, because we know there are still motorists that passed along that road that may have dashcam footage, for example, that may have seen something. And so to get the public confidence and trust back, I would be appealing to those people and really trying to repair the damage that has been done. But it's been so catastrophic now that I fear that simply might never be achieved.
Well, we've all got our fingers crossed for a positive resolution to this story, haven't we? Thank you both so much, Peter Bleksley and Emma Kenny. Right, still to come. We'll have the Deputy Leader of the Scottish Conservatives, MSP Meghan Gallagher, very shortly. And with no clear successors to Sturgeon, does this mean her dream of Scottish independence is over? But first, on February the 6th, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck southern Turkey and northwest Syria. It has so far left over 41,000 dead. 17 million people have been affected, with many survivors now injured and homeless. Here in Britain, donations have been pouring in, especially where large Turkish populations are settled in North London. Ellie Costello has the story.
North London has the largest Turkish population in the UK. The community here has come together to send aid to people most devastated by the earthquake. ABS Transport is a logistics company that specialises in transporting goods between the UK and Turkey.
It was 3 in the morning when we got a call from one of our truck drivers who said, look, there's been a serious earthquake in the region. From 3 a.m. to 6 a.m, I remember it so clearly because we just sat there, complete silence, just in our heads thinking, what are we going to do? Our company's slogan is, let's lighten your load. So I just turned around and I said, let's lighten Turkey's load. And the whole thing has just unravelled itself, really.
Jeren was overwhelmed with donations, enough to help thousands of people. Many of the parcels were packed with care by local people.
This is one of those boxes that we've not touched. So they've put in crisps, marshmallows, there's pads in here, there's soups. Everything has been bought new. And a baby toy that might be useful. And I think what touched us the most was sending hugs on the card. And they've basically said, stay strong, love Zach.
Jeren's husband Abdullah is driving a convoy of 7 lorries from London to the heart of the disaster zone. The journey will take 4 days and will arrive today. Some of the team are already there, distributing supplies to those in need.
None of us were ever prepared for what we received. In those 24 hours, we only had 4 hours sleep. I'm not from the region, but my husband is. But I did say that I didn't think no one would be affected. I don't think there would be an untouched person. And on Thursday, my cousin, who's the Consulate General in Iskenderun, who liaises between Syria and Turkey, has passed away.
Everyone working at ABS is Turkish, and Jeren says the news is affecting them all.
What's different with our office is that we were getting live updates from our own teams that are working out in Gaziantep, saying we're washing dead. I'd say the word describing it as trauma or traumatized would be a good description as to how we are.
Construction experts believe the collapse of thousands of buildings in Turkey was preventable. Turkish officials have said that arrest warrants for more than 100 people have been issued for failing to follow building codes. Those arrested so far include building contractors.
I am very angry. I am very sad things because the government is nothing to do with the government. The councils there, they shouldn't allow the people to build the houses without the regulation.
For the team here, the focus is on aid parcels. It will be days before normal work here resumes. But for the millions of Turks and Syrians who survived the earthquake, it will be several months, perhaps years, before they can rebuild from the worst disaster in the region's modern history. Ellie Costello, GB News.
Thank you, Ellie. Now, my panel are back with me this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, and the Chair of the Republicans Overseas, Greg Swinson. Morning, gentlemen. For your messages, we were talking about Nicola Bulley there. You saw the interview. I can't stop thinking about this woman and this story. Joanne says, I'm utterly appalled by this so-called revelation that she may have been going through the menopause and liked to drink, so of course she was therefore unstable. Well, you know what? There are many of us out there functioning under all kinds of pressure, says Joanne. I'm sure she was. This latest revelation from the police is the lowest of the low in every possible way. Shame on them. A lot of people echoing that, Charlie. I felt like that detail was merely to defend themselves, and their press conference yesterday was very defensive.
I think that's right, and I think it's important to separate, as I think somebody said earlier on, the investigation that the police officers are taking, so the police on the grounds that are clearly doing a good job and as best a job as they can to find Nicola, versus the communications team and the people that are in the back office that are actually instructing what takes place. I think it has been a bit of a shambles. And I think, look, whenever there is a missing person story, it grips the nation. And there are other stories like Madeleine McCann, who obviously we know as a young girl went missing in Portugal, Claudia Lawrence, the chef that was in the University of York. It is all about the unknown because, you know, nobody knows what's happened to Nicola. Whatever the circumstances are, it's a terrible, terrible case, and we just hope that she can be found and that we can get some answers as quickly as possible. But that will only happen if, I think, we can allow the police that are on the ground to continue to do their job and do it well.
I don't think they are doing it particularly well, though, Greg.
Well, I mean, it's difficult because in missing persons cases, you have to be communicating with the public, which makes the messaging and the communications team all the more urgent. You can't just, you know, keep it private because you need, you know, if there are people out there that can help the police, you need to be messaging to them. So I think Peter and Emma brought up some great points that it's the communications that have been a disaster. I think it's difficult to criticize the police function right now and the search. We don't really know, but we can all agree that the messaging has been
I tell you why I think I'm so critical of them. All of that, they assumed from the get-go that she was in the river. Right. They assumed, it was the assumption was that she's drowned. That's it. Yeah. And all of that focus seemed to be there. As Peter was saying and Emma was saying there, they didn't cordon off the particular area. They didn't cordon off the bench. I imagine it's a missing... You know, 200,000 people in this country go missing every year. 90% of them will turn up safe and well. thank goodness. But it looks like I've been wondering, why have they assumed she's in the river? What's the assumption? Now this detail has come out that apparently she liked to drink. I mean, we don't know to what extent. I feel dreadfully sorry for her under these circumstances. The idea that people are talking about you in your absence in this way, Charlie, it feels incredibly like they've taken away her dignity.
I think so. I think that's right. And I do feel for her family at this time, who are clearly going through... I mean, she's on every front page of every newspaper in the country. And I think, look, you know, there has been a serious breakdown in communication, particularly with the diving team, who said, look, had they known this particular bit of information, they might have taken their search elsewhere, and, you know, in a missing persons case, time is everything. So it is incredibly, incredibly sad, and I think questions will be asked of Lancashire Police, how they have conducted this inquiry. But the main focus is to make sure that we find Nicola and that her family's minds can be put at ease.
Yeah, absolutely. Sasha said on email, I can't believe the incompetence of Lancashire Police to now say that Nicola had alcohol and menopausal issues is disgusting. Have they given no thought to how her family will feel hearing this? If Nicola is somewhere hearing this, will it not adversely affect her mental health even more? I feel this statement is somehow to cover their backs in a woefully incompetent investigation from the outset. Thank you. Keep your views coming this morning, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Right, Greg, Elon Musk. Elon Musk was talking at the World Government Summit on Wednesday, and it was in Dubai, and it was a room full of very important and very powerful men predominantly. I don't think there was a woman in the room. And he did a speech on Zoom onto the screen, and it was at the World Government Summit. And he said, I know this is called the World Government Summit, but I think we should be a little bit concerned about actually becoming too much of a single world government. Does he have a point?
Of course he has a point, and just the name World Government Summit should be a bit troubling. But, you know, this is Davos gone wild, or maybe just another Davos. And I think, you know, it's quite natural for people to be suspicious of these elites getting together and talking about the reset and all the other kind of rubbish that comes out of Davos. So, yeah, I think Elon has a point. And he's, you know, he's definitely smart. We can't argue with that. And so when he speaks, he speaks, like going back to President Trump, he's very candid and he says the things that many of us are thinking, and he's brave enough to say it.
And he was on this screen that was about 25 metres high, Charlie, and all of these men expected him to say a world government is a brilliant idea, and I love the fact that he undermined it.
Well, again, like Greg's absolutely right, like President Trump, no end of sort of surprises when it comes to Elon Musk. But I do think that there is a serious point, because I think actually greater cooperation amongst sort of, you know, regions and nations is no bad thing. So I think, yes, whilst there's a lot of scepticism around when these big events come together, political events, whether it's Davos, whether it's things like the World Economic Forum, whether it's like the EU. Of course, there's scepticism about being part of these big organisations and institutions. But I think the only way you make progress, I think, is when you can come together and fix things that are happening right across the world, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's things against China. These are issues where we as a West, and particularly as a Europe and with our American friends, we do need to stand closer together and become more united.
Well, yes and no. I would disagree with you, and so would Elon Musk, because he says, if I may say, we want to avoid creating a civilizational risk. I mean, he takes it that seriously by having, he said, frankly, this might sound a little odd, too much cooperation between governments. He talks about the fall of Rome, which took place in the 5th century. I read that. I couldn't remember that off the top of my head. As an example of civilization collapse. He pointed to the simultaneous advancements in arts and sciences among Islamic societies. So he was saying, basically, as some cultures and communities and nations do well at certain times, others don't do so bad. He says, while Rome was falling, Islam was rising. So you had a caliphate doing well while Rome was doing terribly. And that ended up being the source of preservation of knowledge and many scientific advancements. At this same event, Klaus Schwab was on the stage saying that technology is changing our life, and if you are there, you will have the power to run the world. That's the messaging which scares people.
And it should. And that's why they, instead of calling it the World Government Forum, they, you know, call it the Big Government Forum. So statism is what should trouble people. I'm all for governments of the world getting together, especially on security issues. That's why we have the UN, even though they're, for the most part, a failure. But that's important, you know, to preserve peace. But more government, big government, statism is what should trouble people, and I think Elon Musk
absolutely the homogenisation of countries around the world. I want to talk about Sam Smith. Sam Smith is a pop star who identifies as being neither male nor female. He was doing an interview on the BBC, and somebody asked him what he likes to do in his spare time, and he said, "I'm a fisher them. I'm a fisher them." So not a fisherman, not a fisherwoman, a fisher them. He had a little wry smile on his face, Charlie, when he said it. Is this the way we want our language to go?
No. And look, it is whether you're a postman or a postperson or a firefighter as opposed to a fireman. I think we can get too much into the weeds about things like this. And it's sort of for the overwhelming majority of fishermen, I think they'll be slightly gobsmacked. But it particularly comes at a time where I think Sam Smith has called for, and we had a gender-neutral awards. I think it might have been. And accommodate this particular language, we ended up having 4 male winners of a gender-neutral award.
Because that's what happens, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to get your thoughts on that in a minute, Greg. We've still to come this morning. Does the fight for Scottish independence end with Nicola Sturgeon's resignation? Are we finally a united Britain? See you in a few minutes. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
On GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess I've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 16th of February. I'm Bev Turner. Today, Scotland's longest-serving First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, dramatically resigned after 8 years in power. I'm asking, what will she be most remembered for? Who are the likely candidates to replace her? Is this a victory for biological women? And what does this mean for the future of an independent Scotland? Police have this morning been accused of victim blaming after they revealed missing mum Nicola Bulley suffered from alcohol issues in the months before she vanished. Is it right to highlight this, or have the police failed Nicola Bulley's family? The preliminary COVID inquiry, which was started only 2 days ago, could face a delay by up to a month. I'll tell you why later in the hour. Has the fight for Scottish independence died with Nicola Sturgeon's resignation? Let me know your thoughts. Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Lots more this morning, but first, let's get you up to date with the news headlines.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon announced her unexpected decision to stand down. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for a leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, and Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes. A new method of screening ambulance calls is to be introduced in England in an effort to reduce waiting times. Ambulance crews will now review Category 2 calls, which are not immediately life-threatening. These calls include conditions ranging from heart attacks and strokes to burns and severe headaches. Around 40% of these patients will receive a callback from a doctor, a nurse or a paramedic to see if there's an alternative to sending an ambulance. Ministers have announced an extra £421 million to boost alcohol and drug treatment and recovery across England. The new funding will be given to 151 councils to fund initiatives aimed at tackling addiction and cutting crime, such as recruiting more staff, better recovery support for prison leavers and investment in treatment. The government says it could prevent nearly 1,000 drug-related deaths.
We know that drug addiction drives so much crime. It drives about half of all crime. And because we know that if people get into drug treatment, that radically reduces their likelihood that they will be out there causing chaos and causing crime. And so we're making this big investment that will mean more people in treatment, new types of treatment. And as well as being good for all the rest of us and cutting crime, of course it's a path out of terrible, terrible addiction for people who are trapped in it.
Labour is promising to recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. Speaking in the last hour, the Shadow Home Secretary condemned a complete collapse of Home Office leadership on crime and policing under the Conservatives. Yvette Cooper also unveiled Labour's neighbourhood policing guarantee, assigning PCSOs to every community to increase police visibility. But the Home Office claimed their proposed investment is a tenth of what the government is currently delivering. British gas owner Centrica has posted profits of £3.3 billion. That's more than triple what it made last year. It comes after Ofgem launched an urgent inquiry to investigate the company for installing prepayment meters by force in vulnerable customers' homes. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has called the announcement a betrayal for British gas customers and called on the government to implement a proper windfall tax. Meanwhile, 1 in 3 small businesses might not be able to cover their energy bills from April when the price guarantee rises. It's expected to increase by 20%, and at the same time, government will phase down its support for firms. New research by Experian has found around 30% of the 1.2 million small businesses it analysed will be at heightened risk of collapse in the spring. MPs and campaign groups have criticised Lancashire Police for its handling of the case of missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley. Yesterday, detectives revealed Miss Bulley was vulnerable, classed as high risk, and disclosed her issues with alcohol linked to the struggles with menopause that she faced. The 45-year-old disappeared almost 3 weeks ago. Tory MP Alicia Kearns said she's deeply uncomfortable with this level of detail. But underwater rescue expert Peter Faulding, who's been involved in the search, says the police aren't to blame.
I still feel so sorry for them that it's been released this way. It should never have come out. They could have just told us on the quiet. Press wouldn't have known. No, we would just been changed everything. I feel so, like I said, the police are getting beaten up here. This is terrible because it's not the police. It's just the comms piece where whoever's made these decisions needs to answer lots of questions. Let's not knock the police. Let's not knock the family. Let's regroup, get together and then redo this search again so we actually try and get some closure for this poor family.
The number of people who've died following major earthquakes that struck southern Turkey and northern Syria has risen to almost 42,000. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Authority says more than 4,300 aftershocks have hit the country since the initial quake. It's been 10 days since the disaster first struck, and rescue efforts are continuing. Yesterday, a 13-year-old boy was pulled from the rubble alive after being trapped for 228 hours. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to Bev.
So the search is now underway to find a new leader of the Scottish National Party after Nicola Sturgeon announced her resignation during this show yesterday, announcing her decision to quit. Sturgeon said she would stay on until the next leader is elected, but refused to back anyone as a successor. And despite facing criticism over her party's gender recognition law, Sturgeon said her decision to go was not based on recent issues about gender. But is that true? And does Sturgeon's exit mean a united kingdom will survive? Joining me now is the Deputy Leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Meghan Gallagher. Good morning, Meghan. Great to see you. First of all, tell me how you greeted this news yesterday.
Well, I mean, I think Nicola Sturgeon has left Scotland a more divided country than when she first entered office. And, you know, the best description, I think, of her time in office was her taking her eyes off the ball. If we look at NHS waiting times, if we look at the drugs death scandal, the ferry fiasco, and, of course, Nicola Sturgeon failing to make education her #1 priority.
Which is a brilliant way of saying what she did wrong, but kind of avoided my question, which is to say, how did you feel personally when you heard that she was leaving? Were you surprised? Were you delighted?
I was surprised. However, you know, I think leadership does take its toll eventually on everybody, and that's regardless of, you know, political party or political persuasion. So, you know, I think everyone naturally comes to the decision where they no longer feel that they're able to continue on in that role.
It sounds like you've got a bit of sympathy for her, Meghan.
No, I mean, not sympathy. I think I sympathise from her, you know, in terms of, you know, being a woman MSP and Nicola Sturgeon being the first female First Minister. So I do have sympathies there. But in terms of her record and her time in office as First Minister, then no, sorry, I don't, because her record is appalling.
This is the irony, though, isn't it, Meghan? For people like us who want to see more women wielding more influence, having a powerful role in politics, it is quite heartbreaking when someone who's been in that position for so long, whether you agree with their politics or not, which neither of us do, I think there is a tinge of sadness that she hasn't managed to last the distance. However, how ironic that what probably did for her was her gender ideology, in which she seemed to always put forward, not seem to, she categorically couldn't answer what a biological woman was. It would have been so easy, wouldn't it, for her to say there are women and there are trans women, but she wouldn't make that commitment. Why not?
Well, I mean, I think she backed herself into a corner, and she failed to take into account the concerns that women were raising, you know, right from the start of the process of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. You know, it eventually got to the point where she was refusing to call a violent rapist a man, and you saw from the exchanges between Nicola Sturgeon and Douglas Ross at First Minister's Question that she eventually backed herself into a corner that she could no longer get herself out of.
Now, of course, one consequence of this is that Scottish politicians' media offices have had to dust their phones off and start taking calls from the likes of me wanting to hear from all you have to say. One upside of this is that as we run into the next general election, everyone is going to be very interested in what's happening north of the border.
Oh, definitely. I think all eyes are on Scotland now and what's going to happen and who's going to succeed Nicola Sturgeon. Of course, it's going to come as no surprise that I don't have a preferred candidate. It's the job of the official opposition, the second largest party in Scotland, the Scottish Conservatives, to make sure that we can get rid of the SNP government come the next election. And of course, when it comes to the general election, that we're winning more seats here north of the border.
Now, of course, the people who are celebrating this morning are the Scottish Labour Party. They are seeing this as a victory for them. They won 1 seat up north in the last election, but today they're saying that they think they're going to get 25. What's your response to that?
I mean, I think they're being a little bit preemptive of the result, to be honest. I mean, we are the second largest party in Scotland, and I think it's the Scottish Conservatives who are most likely to benefit from the fall in support of the SNP from the last general election. Across rural Scotland, for example, there's a number of tight constituency seats that we are planning to fight in the upcoming general election. Labour, on the other hand, I mean, they've got 1 MP, as you say, and, looking across Scotland, I think there's very few obvious seats that come to mind where they can target. And the fact is, the most marginal seats are between us and the SNP, so I think that's where the fight's going to be.
We've seen what happens when there is a leadership battle down here in Westminster. We've had enough of them, Meghan, frankly, for the last 12 months. But what it does is it focuses a lot of attention on that particular political party. This is what the SNP are now going to be dealing with. They've got their conference, I believe, next month, if they're still going ahead with that, with Nicola Sturgeon as the leader in waiting, effectively, a kind of de facto leader for the time being. How will you, as the Scottish Conservatives, push back against all of the attention that they're about to get?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to focus on, things that matter to the people of Scotland. The SNP are a one-trick pony, as we see time and time again. Their special conference, again, was to focus on a de facto independence referendum. We actually want to see a Scotland and a Scottish government that focuses on things like housing, like our NHS, like our education system. They're the things that people want to speak about when we get to the doorstep, and they're not getting that from the SNP. So we're going to offer the real alternative that Scotland needs, and that's what we're focusing on just now. And that's what we're planning on the route up to our own party conference, which will happen in the spring.
Now, whoever becomes the next leader of the SNP, be it John Swinney, Angus Robertson, Kate Forbes, will they come out swinging for another independence referendum, or would that be a political suicide for them?
I mean, I think we'll need to wait and see. I mean, there doesn't seem to be, as we say, necessarily a front runner as it stands. And I think we'll need to see who the runners and riders as they emerge and what their vision is before we can look to see what their plan is. And no doubt it will have something to do with independence. Let's face it, nationalism is their bread and butter. However, I don't want to see that from any candidate. What I would like to see is, for once, the Scottish Government focus on what matters. I don't want to see any more arguments over another independence referendum. That argument is well settled. The people of Scotland do not want another independence referendum, and I think the next party leader and First Minister of the SNP and indeed Scotland, that's what their focus needs to be on. It needs to be on the people of Scotland, not this, nonsense of another referendum.
OK, thank you. Deputy Leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Meghan Gallagher. Thank you for joining me. Meghan is one of the many faces you're going to see a lot more of in the media in the next few months as Scotland slug it out up north. Now, the political parties, Marion has said, if you think that independence is dead in the water, you know nothing about the Scots people. What do you think? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Still to come, the Markles are going head-to-head. Meghan Markle's half-sister Samantha has claimed that the Duchess of Sussex defamed her in order to cover up her false rags-to-riches story. See you in a few minutes.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Lots of cloud around today. The winds are going to be the big feature of the weather tonight and particularly tomorrow morning across parts of the north. We have Met Office yellow warnings in place. That's because of this area of low pressure deepening, intensifying as it moves to the north of Scotland. Look at the squeeze in the isobars. Those winds really picking up, especially through Friday morning. More on that in a moment. Let's get through the rest of today. As I said, a lot of cloud out there. Some drizzly conditions over parts of eastern England, clearing away, the odd spot of drizzle elsewhere, but also something a bit brighter developing. Parts of East Wales, northeast England may well see some sunny spells before more rain pushes back into Northern Ireland. It's pretty mild out there today, double digits almost across the board, and with a bit of brightness we could get into the teens. During this evening, that rain is going to spread from Northern Ireland into western Scotland, where it will last all night. The rain getting heavier and heavier through the night as that low pressure moves in. The winds also then steadily increasing, really picking up after midnight across the northwest. Further south, well, it'll get a bit breezy. It stays cloudy. Look at these overnight temperatures, very mild indeed. We won't feel mild tomorrow in the winds. Now, those winds really whipping up tomorrow morning across Scotland initially, but also down across parts of northern England. Gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, likely to cause some disruption, particularly for high-sided vehicles, but could all cause some flying debris, certainly some disruption to the transport networks. Planes, flights may be cancelled. So a very blustery day across the north with showers in the far north. Again, further south, many places just dry and cloudy, but it will be windier than today. And we could at times see a little bit of rain in the southwest. Another very mild day across the south. Further north, it will be a colder day, despite a bit more sunshine, but obviously feeling a lot colder with those winds. Now, those winds will be easing through the afternoon and into the evening. A bit more rain coming into the northwest as we go through Friday evening. More details on the weather warnings on the Met Office website. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh yes, already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News. We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel. Welcome back, it's 11:19. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Still to come, we're going to be looking into knife crime and why it's on the rise, especially in rural areas. I'll tell you why that is. And what the government is doing to help out before midday, don't miss it. Now, let me introduce you to my guests this morning. I'm still joined by former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, and the Chairman of the Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Right, Greg, I don't know how Americans feel about Meghan Markle right now. I know you can't speak for the whole of America, but as our token American this morning, is she still as popular out there as she was a year ago?
No, absolutely not. And I think there's this misconception that she is popular and that Harry is popular in the U.S., but it's really just because some of the late-night comedians adore them and continue to adore them. And so, yeah, some of the traditional media outlets, as well as the late-night comedians, have a fondness for them that is not shared by the American people. So, and that wasn't the case 2 years ago, that's for sure. I mean, she was warmly embraced, and so was Harry, originally in the U.S.
But they're low-hanging fruit, aren't they? If you want someone to poke a bit of fun off, they've become parodies of themselves via their Netflix drama, Harry's book, all the interviews.
Absolutely, and they, again, they had a following, and it was a very positive following, and they've really self-destructed it.
Same here,
yeah,
Charlie.
Exactly.
That's my take on it. We loved Meghan Markle when she first came along. That wedding, it was brilliant, dragging the royal family into the 21st century. It's all gone wrong. Specifically today, this is the fact that her sister, Samantha Markle, she appeared in court yesterday at a virtual court hearing. She's accusing her sister of defamation, basically using a false rags to riches narrative. This could end pretty badly for Meghan Markle, couldn't it?
Well, it's impossible to believe that anything could be fabricated or the story could have additional drama, a dramatic license to apply to their lives. But I think you're absolutely right. And it goes to the crux of what you were saying, that this is a couple who have pleaded for privacy and yet have gone through an Oprah interview, have had a Netflix series that now, an autobiography by Harry called Spare, that just reveals too much information.
Yeah.
And information that is constantly being challenged, even during that Netflix documentary, using images of what seemed to be mass crowds of paparazzi. It was an event totally unrelated to them at all. It was a government event that they weren't at. So
This is the pushback now, isn't it? I mean, and it isn't just, as you said, Greg, it isn't just a British thing that we like to bring people down who've done well and who've, written books and have series about themselves. But this is when that kind of pride and that hubris comes home to roost.
Right, and I think, the reactions in both countries are very similar, but Americans love rags to riches stories. They really do. They just don't like fake ones. And so, now I don't know if it's worthy of a libel case. I don't think the case will work, actually, but it doesn't mean that it's a good thing, So I think this rags to riches argument she made, I mean, she went to Northwestern, very elite school, very hard to get into, was in a very exclusive sorority called Kappa, the beautiful people sorority. The rags to riches thing is not going to fly.
Because her father was quite successful in Hollywood as a lighting director.
Yeah, it wasn't, I mean, she wasn't, didn't struggle through poverty. She didn't grow up in Watts in L.A. I mean, this is a bit of an exaggeration. And again, if it was true, I think Americans would love that, the princess story, But, that's I think she's using that. She obviously likes to, appeal to, for pity, which is crazy. Everybody should, I think many people would be quite envious of her.
Well, she casts herself as the victim repeatedly, doesn't she?
Loves the victimhood.
Funnily enough, when Nicola Sturgeon was resigning yesterday, my inbox was full of people saying, is she going to do a Meghan Markle and cast herself as the victim here?
Yeah.
It's become a thing, hasn't it? Her sister, interestingly enough, Samantha, she's only asking for $75,000 in damages. It seems like quite a random... By the time she's paid her legal fees out of that, she's going to end up with $10,000. Maybe Meghan Markle should just give it. She got 30 million or whatever it was for the Netflix. 90, was it 90? 30 million for that? I don't know. These numbers are so enormous. I think he got 30 million for his book and they got another 50 million or so for the documentary series. She should just give her the money, shouldn't she, Charlie?
Well, one way out of it, I suppose, you could just do that, which begs the question as to why, this story just adds to the narrative of being the victim, that, not only is the public against them, the media, the establishment, but, Meghan's own family are now turning against her. So, woe is me.
Yeah, quite. Woe is me. Now, talking of woe is me, some people who genuinely do have something to be concerned about is those people in the country right now who are genuinely suffering from mental health conditions. A charity boss has warned that mental health in this country is currently the worst it has ever been, and they've cited the cost of living crisis, COVID pandemic recovery, global instability is grinding people down. We're feeling it, aren't we, Greg, at the moment?
Yeah, and I think it goes back, to our earlier conversation. This is government, statism or over-government regulation gone wild. We should have all expected this during the lockdowns, where They were keeping people in their homes. They're keeping people from socializing. Surprise, surprise, there's mental health issues immediately or a year or two after. So, I think that the government was asleep at the wheel on many of this, not just the UK government, but governments around the world.
Your mate and former boss, Michael Gove, what would he think about seeing this now and seeing that this is the consequence of draconian restrictions during the pandemic, taken on a decision basis by only listening to one side of the scientific community? What are politicians feeling about this now that we're in the hangover?
Well, I think he'd be, like everybody, worried to see that actually the nation's health is taking a turn for the worse in a way in which nobody would want to see.
But we knew it was going to happen, Charlie.
Well, I think that's why an inquiry into the COVID has to happen and should happen, and this absolutely does need to be looked at, because in particular, if we're talking about children's mental health, which, as the article says, will be the next health crisis, mental health crisis for the next generation, it is a really, really important factor. And I think, look, these are numbers that actually you couldn't see, and you can count all the COVID cases, the number of vaccines deployed, and it does give people a sense of success. But actually, it's the numbers of people that you can't count, the number of cases, people that are affected by mental health or any other diseases that weren't counted during the COVID pandemic. I think that really does need to be looked into.
But you didn't have to be a psychologist, did you, to work out that if we locked up teenagers during their formative years, if we masked children in schools, if we instilled this hideous culture of fear for a virus which was never of any risk to the young, this was always going to happen. Is it that if anybody raised those sorts of issues in meetings at that time, they would, just be ignored, or there just weren't the people in the room to raise those issues?
Well, I think, as I said before, I think the inquiry needs to look at all of the discussions that took place and how decisions were made. I think the nation was being led by, the government was following the science, and it was being led
following one side of the science. One side of the science.
Well, the government said it was following.
And dismissing any science that was contrary to what their beliefs were, and they buried the Great Barrington Declaration, of course. So there's been no apologies. This is shocking. There's been no apologies or regrets from the very politicians that were advocating and insisting that children should be masked and teenagers should be locked at home and students shouldn't be at school. And yet, it was quite obvious at that time. I'm not talking about March of 2020, but surely later in the year and into 21, when it was quite obvious that these restrictions were unnecessary and they weren't following the science. They were following a couple of models that were proven ridiculous pretty early on in the process. So.
Yeah. Do you have any faith that we're going to be talking about the COVID inquiry in just a moment, actually, and the fact that it's been delayed? But do you think the COVID inquiry will ask these questions? I have no faith, Charlie.
We have to wait and see. And look, it's difficult for me because it was part of a conversation on the wing that sort of wanted to see things open up, particularly in creative industries where, lockdown and where things could have been done, I would have thought better. But, And
what was the argument, though? Was it just we're going to look at what Nicola Sturgeon's doing and we're going to go even more harder on our restrictions? We've got to beat Nicola Sturgeon to be the most draconian and to give this impression that we are looking after our country. That's the problem. This patrician attitude which has slipped into government. Was that what you were met with?
Well, I think, you had Sir Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, who are the leading scientists and medical professionals of the country that were advising the government at the time. I think there were cases, perhaps, when things got too, one tried to outdo each other.
Competitive.
In terms of, how difficult the restrictions could have been. So when we had the tiering system and you ended up, being next door to, I don't know, an area that was in the green zone versus the red.
Yeah.
It was too complicated for its own good. But as I say, the inquiry needs to look at all of this, and lessons do need to be learned. I think that's absolutely clear, to make sure that if there is ever another pandemic or anything that we see on this scale, that we know how to deal with it better and make sure that we prevent the kind of stories that we're hearing today, such as the mental health crisis.
Well, Baroness Hallett is conducting this inquiry, and as I say, we're going to be talking about this in just a moment. I don't know whether you've had much time, Greg, I know you're a busy man, to look at the terms of reference of the COVID inquiry, but until the Us For Them charity got involved, it didn't even have a remit to look at the effects on children.
Right, which is just amazing to me, and they were probably the ones who suffered the most.
100%.
And as you said, Bev, with no risk, little to no risk. And so it's pretty outrageous that they almost it seems like they want to sweep it under the rug, because I think so many of them will look really bad coming out of this inquiry. So maybe it's self-interest that they didn't want to really open up, too many of these issues. But it has to be done, and I think, this was a complete failure on so many levels.
It was. Well, regardless of how you feel about the detail of the experience, I will be holding them to account here on GB News. As I say, I'm going to be talking to somebody in just a moment about the COVID inquiry, but also still to come, there is a male contraceptive pill, which is apparently, it gives you 100% protection against pregnancy. I'll tell you all about it. That's after your morning's news.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's just past 11:30. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon's surprise decision to stand down. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for the leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister, John Sweeney, and Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes. Labour will recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. The Shadow Home Secretary unveiled plans for a neighbourhood policing guarantee, assigning officers and PCSOs to every community. The Home Office claim their proposed investment is a tenth of what the government is currently delivering, but Yvette Cooper criticised the Conservatives for their hands-off approach to policing, claiming not enough is being done.
So I want to talk today about what's been a complete collapse in Home Office leadership on crime and policing under the Conservatives, how they've stood back while neighbourhood policing has crumbled, while the charge rate has plummeted, while confidence in policing and the criminal justice system have fallen, while more victims are being let down and more criminals are getting off.
A new method of screening ambulance calls is to be introduced in England in an effort to reduce waiting times. Ambulance crews will now review Category 2 calls, which are not immediately life-threatening. They include conditions ranging from heart attacks and strokes to burns and severe headaches. Around 40% of these patients will receive a call back from a doctor, nurse or paramedic to see if there's an alternative to sending an ambulance. And British gas owner Centrica has posted profits of £3.3 billion. That's more than triple what it made the year before. It's after Ofgem launched an urgent inquiry to investigate the company for installing prepayment meters by force in vulnerable customers' homes. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has called the announcement a betrayal for British gas customers and called on the government to implement a proper windfall tax. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Bev.
The absolutely critical COVID inquiry was meant to start 2 days ago, but it already faces a delay of up to 1 month. That is right, 1 month. I'll tell you why it's been delayed and what this means for bereaved families. You don't want to miss this.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, it's 11:36. Now, new data suggests that knife crime in home counties has gone up 10 times higher than 10 years ago. The rise of county-line drugs gangs are a factor in the increase in violence in rural areas as criminals are being pushed out to urban areas. Meanwhile, the chairman of West Midlands Police Federation has called for a new approach to tackling violent crime and gathering intelligence. Let's get more now from GB News' West Midlands reporter Jack Carson. Good morning, Jack.
Well, good morning, Bev. We know that knife crime is on the increase, 11% in the last around 12 months as an increase, as well as around 50% increase in England in knife crime with England and Wales compared to March 2012 over the last decade, as you mentioned. So we know it's on the up, and it means that what we're looking for and what many of the police are looking for is a new approach, and particularly the politicians. We heard the Shadow Home Secretary today, Yvette Cooper, in her speech, essentially how she and the Labour Party and the Labour government would take a new approach to policing, the formation of neighbourhood policing teams, the recruitment of 13,000 more police officers to have a presence within the community, an increase of 4,000 PCSOs to have police officers at the heart of their community. And it's similar to what the chair of the West Midlands Police Federation, Richard Cook, has been saying. I spoke to him about how he thinks policing should change, and this is what he had to say.
We've been calling for a long time for a return to policing which is embedded in local communities, which then gives us the intelligence we need to react and respond spontaneously, as opposed to waiting until events happen. And that's talking about things like Section 60, use of Section 60, which can be controversial with some, but I think we should be using it far more before the event. You know, Parliament gave us these powers and we're simply not using them to the degree that we should be. I think this needs to be about really tough enforcement, unapologetic enforcement, particularly around knife possession, that suspects can have certainty that if they're found with a knife in public without reasonable excuse, they're going to be arrested, they're going to be taken to custody, and they are going to be looking at a charge and going to court. And that hasn't happened by anywhere near enough. Of course, we've got to prevent knife crime, and that's the other side of it, you know, and that is why I talk specifically with regard to policing about having police officers who have the time and the space in their communities that they know well because they work there, and they're able to get to know the areas.
Well, listening to that, when you look at the stats, in the West Midlands, there's been a 32% increase in knife crime. That's the largest percentage increase. It's pre-COVID levels. The knife crime levels here are above what they were before the pandemic. And the Conservative Party, in response to Yvette Cooper's speech today, saying that they are set to meet their target of recruiting 20,000 police officers by April, and they say that they are still the party of law and order, but Labour saying they struggle to believe that. We know, of course, what was interesting actually what Richard Cook said as well in that interview when I spoke to him. He mentioned that actually when you have police in the community, what you get is a greater trust within the community, and therefore when you need to look into crimes, that there's already a level of intelligence there because people in the community can trust to go and speak to their police officers, and it's a return to almost what the police originally was back by Robert Peel about being in the community to keep those communities safe, and that's what he's saying needs to be done in order to help bring down these knife crime levels.
Thank you, Jack. It's a very depressing topic. Thank you very much for illuminating it for us. OK, you have been in touch about Nicola Sturgeon. Josh has said, I sincerely hope Sturgeon does at least one good thing for Scotland before leaving office and relinquishes the powers she handed out to the unelected Greens no one voted for. However she got away with that is mind-boggling. Right. We want to get a hold of somebody to talk about the COVID inquiry. We're having some technical issues. Luckily, I have two superb political analysts with me. Now, this is a story, Greg Swinson, that I have wanted to talk about. It broke on social media, and it is surrounded in a little bit of mystery as to why the American media has not gone bigger on this. Some people are calling it potentially the biggest environmental disaster in the history of America. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, there was a massive train derailment in a very small town called East Palatine in the eastern part of Ohio, so closer to Pittsburgh, 25 miles or so from Pittsburgh. And it was a massive environmental disaster, basically filled with chemicals and the handling of it has been rather controversial because they did they actually burned the cars after they derailed. They came in and thought that, it's better to burn off the chemicals than to...
And the images,
horrible.
Greg, it's like a massive mushroom cloud. And it's one of those stories which was actually covered better by the public on the ground than it was by the mainstream media.
And the mainstream media ignored it because it's in flyover land, right? This isn't, some existential crisis of climate change that they talk about in the salons of Georgetown and the Upper East Side of Manhattan. This is a working class town that's been devastated by offshoring of manufacturing. So the poverty rate is high there, the average income much below the norm. And this is a town that's already suffering. And they've completely ignored it. And even especially Pete Buttigieg, who's the transportation secretary, was at a press conference that day and chose not to discuss it, made a crack about balloons, and then talked about the shamefulness of the construction crews on transportation infrastructure projects that were predominantly white male. Like, why are we talking about this? It's like identity politics has completely perverted the very people that are supposed to be running the infrastructure in America. It's really a shame.
And this vinyl chloride is this chemical on these trains, which is supposed to be one of the most carcinogenic chemicals known to humanity, which has resulted, I don't know whether you've been able to see this, Charlie. I would really urge people to have a look online and find the footage of it. But people are putting films of fish that are dead in the water, animals dying in farms, and the public. There's one of the pictures we're looking at. That's the cloud I was talking about. Look at the images. I mean, they are incredible. When I say a mushroom cloud, to anybody listening on the radio, it cast the most enormous cloud into the sky, miles wide, kilometres wide. And then this is the footage we're seeing right now, which was of the fire service, like Greg said, burning off the chemicals. They thought, perhaps wrongly, that if they burnt off the chemicals, that was the right thing to do. And there is video footage of one gentleman crying because he understands what this is, because he lives near it. It's a shocking story.
Totally. And just reading the story and hearing that beautiful description from Greg, just what's actually happened. It's a gas that was, or part of the chemicals that have been exposed is a gas that was deployed as a chemical weapon in the First World War. So it goes back all that way and just shows how harmful it is. And it also, the article goes on to say that the chemicals, as part of this release, can cause burning and irritation to the eyes and skin, irritation to the nose and throat, causing shortness of breath and coughing. So it is a serious condition if anybody inhales these chemicals. So it, perhaps it hasn't got the coverage that you're absolutely right.
I'd love to do a little deeper dive into that at some point, maybe next week. Now, the anticipated COVID-19 inquiry is facing delays in a secrecy row over civil servants' names being removed from documents. The preliminary hearing of how thousands of personal details are being manually redacted from submissions, including the names of junior officials who took decisions in the pandemic. I want to get a little bit more on this. I'm going to be joined now by the Sunday Express's Health and Social Affairs editor, Lucy Johnston. Good morning, Lucy. Great to see you. Now, we were hoping by now that we would have a couple of days of evidence that Baroness Hellett would be accumulating the information which we all need to understand what happened. So tell us why this delay.
Well, I mean, there's delay after delay, and I think the bigger problem really is that law-led inquiries are very unwieldy, they're very expensive, they take a lot of time, that's we've seen from history, and they're very good at telling you what happened, but they're not very good at telling you why things happened. And under the original pandemic plans, a response to a pandemic should have been run by the Cabinet Office. It should have been a societal response because a pandemic is a societal threat. So we should have had educationalists, psychologists, people who looked after children, hospitality, but instead it was run by doctors whose focus is to preserve health. And the remit of the COVID inquiry is not going to look at that, not going to look at why we lost that somewhere in our organisational memory, somewhere in the panic of 2020. And it will just be looking at what happened and taking views from various different people who will all have their view of, you know, how they've been affected and want to. The TUC, I notice, are sort of making a political statements out of it and saying, blaming austerity and things like that. So, you know, whether we're going to learn from it is what I really question.
What will the timescale be, Lucy, now? Do we know they've got this month delay? And also, do we know how much this is costing us?
Good point, yeah. So we've got about 60 barristers. That's, I think the Bloody Sunday inquiry had a similar amount, but it's pretty, you know, it's up there on one of the largest number of barristers. They're costing about £220 an hour, up at maximum. There's some junior solicitors who cost a bit less. So that's about £8,000 a week. So it will be running into millions. And as we've seen, as you've mentioned before, you know, there's this initial delay, and as we see in history, inquiries are always fraught with delays. People will complain, probably will have the word whitewash used at some point very soon, and things will take a lot longer. But whether they come to the answers about why we had a lockdown, whether a lockdown was necessary in the first place, and whether there was an alternative to lockdown, and whether it actually saved lives, are those questions going to be asked? And whether, you know, will we ever know how, you know, I've got teenage children, how their life chances were affected? We can't know that. The inquiry can't answer that. And surely those are the questions that we need to look at so that we can prevent lives being affected for decades. Again, you know, it's to look forward, but we can't possibly answer those questions.
Lucy, my fear is that on, say, issues like the fact that hundreds or decades at least of understanding about natural immunity, basics of virology, basics immunology, why was all of that ripped up? Do we know if the inquiry is going to look at that?
No, as far as I know, it isn't. And that is another problem with the inquiry. It's got a fixed remit and it's not going to look at, you know, as you say, there was lots of voices of people who didn't think we should have a lockdown, and those voices were suppressed and they were censored. It doesn't appear to be looking at that. So we're not going to see, and we had decades of work on masks and the use of masks with respiratory viruses, mass testing for respiratory diseases. All these things are not being apparently looked at. I don't know whether they will be concluded, but that is a problem going forward because this is now the playbook for a pandemic. And if the questions that are asked don't encompass these, then this could happen again.
Yeah. It's also questions like, why did hundreds of years of medical ethics get torn up in terms of the fact that we have never, as human beings, the medical community, at least since World War II, the idea was you would never take a drug for the protection of somebody else. And yet that was also pushed through as the norm without debates. Is that going to be covered in the inquiry?
Absolutely. No, I think that's another thing. And the rights of children, you know, under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, one should never bring any laws into place that would affect children. You know, children must come first. We tore that up. We tore up parliamentary sovereignty and ran roughshod over that, and power was ceded into a few hands. And that needs to be looked at. The Public Health Act, the COVID Act. How did we lose democracy in that way? And again, you know, I feel like the COVID inquiry is going to be just different groups with all their vested interests looking at it, and for good reason, from their perspectives, talking about how they were failed, but actually to look at it, you know, from a further away and say, why did this happen in the first place, and was it the right response, and should we not think about doing something different, because we won't know the long-term effects, certainly not from that inquiry.
Absolutely, and I think those who lost people to COVID, particularly in that first wave, have some huge questions to ask about insufficient PPE, but also about the suppression of cheap and effective treatments that were apparently not available. Lucy Johnson, lovely to talk to you. No doubt we will be discussing this over the forthcoming months. Now, my panel are back with me this morning. Do you know what I'm thinking, Greg Swenson? Before we just go on to our stories, I'm listening to Lucy. A bit like the Great Barrington Declaration, and those particular scientists and immunologists came out, and doctors, with a different version of events then. I wonder whether there should be an alternative COVID inquiry now.
I think there should be, and we need to look, and Lucy mentioned censorship. You know, we need to look at what government agencies were advocating this censorship of not just, you know, views that they didn't agree with, but any opposing views. And so that I think is one of the great crimes of this crisis, not just in the UK, but around the world.
America's doing better on that, with the Twitter files and the Twitter. Just if you're, I don't know how familiar you are with that at the moment, Greg, but just explain to our audience what's happening now in terms of some executives at Twitter.
Yeah, so once Elon Musk bought Twitter, he was able to expose through the Twitter files the censorship that was going on a number of issues, the Hunter Biden laptop, for example, but most importantly for this discussion, the Great Barrington Declaration, and anyone else who was posting any sensible information. It wasn't, and they, of course, labeled it misinformation, disinformation, collusion with the Russians, whatever they could call it, to basically keep the power in the hands of these government bureaucrats. Fortunately, in the U.S., we have the federalist system, so states could make their own rules. And you saw the red-blue divide, where the red states, the most well-known, of course, is Florida, that refused to lock down or impose mask mandates and vax mandates, not only because it wasn't following the science, but also it wasn't their right. It wasn't a governor's right to shut down his or her own people.
And if people don't know, the Great Barrington Declaration was a document drawn up by people like Jay Bhattacharya, Sinistra Gupta, people who were Robert Mueller, people who were the top of their field medically, immunology, and the emails are there from the FDA saying we need to discredit them as fringe activists.
Fauci was leading the charge at discrediting these people.
Absolutely,
it's criminal.
And that needs to be an inquiry that maybe I'll lead. Right, moving on. Otherwise I won't sleep at night, I don't think, for the next few decades. Charlie, you can help me. Get in touch with all your MP mates. Tell them to come and have a chat with me. I'll sort it out. Right. Gentlemen, slight change of gear, but I think this is a really interesting story. So for years, we've been talking about whether there would ever be a male contraceptive pill, OK? And would women have intimate relations with a man who would say, oh, yeah, I've taken the male contraceptive pill. Yeah, I'm all right. We're all set, love. But it looks like there is one now which they are calling a game changer, a new male contraceptive pill. 100% reliability, Charlie, if taken 30 minutes before intimacy, and appears to be 100% effective at stopping pregnancies for at least 2 hours. It works by halting men's sperm swimming towards the eggs or maturing to the stage where it's able to fertilise an egg to create a baby. Oh, it's a bit of an ethical minefield, this, isn't it? Would you trust it?
Well, it sounds like you have to be very organised and good with it. Keep a watch with you.
You have to be very confident that you're going to get lucky as well, don't you?
Yes. Timing's to perfection here. But I think, look, it's an interesting topic, and it's a medical breakthrough. I mean, it is a question as to whether, for years, it has been, post-intimacy and without any other contraception. If you're not looking to get pregnant, then obviously it has been a woman that has been able to access a medical a pill to prevent that. Asking a man to do it prior to sex maybe balances out that equilibrium. But, it is an interesting one. I'm sure other medics will want us to be also clear that it doesn't sound as though it stops or prevents you passing on any other kind of STD or STI.
Good point, Charlie Rowley. That's why you're here to be the voice of reason.
So it isn't the answer to, to
No,
everything.
it isn't.
Using a condom still seems to be the best way to prevent all kinds of things that you don't want to.
Quite right too. And I don't know about you, Greg, but I just wouldn't trust him.
Trust but verify. I would, if I were a woman, I would say I have to watch you take the pill.
What kind of
It takes a little romance out of it.
Who said romance is dead?
I'm just common sense.
I don't know. Would you like a pill with your
I'm
dessert?
just
Coffee?
common sense. Yeah, I would. That just seems to be something that could go wrong. And also, you mentioned the timing. 2 hours? Is it an hour and a half? What time is it?
Yes.
There's a lot that could go wrong here.
I can't think of anything that would be more libido crushing, really, than that. Right, gentlemen, we've ended on that particular bombshell. It's been lovely. We can carry this conversation on over some coffee. Right, thank you so much, Greg Swenson, Charlie Rowley. We have come to the end of our show for the week as well. I'll be back on Monday morning at 10. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner. See you Monday.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Lots of cloud around today. The winds are going to be the big feature of the weather tonight and particularly tomorrow morning across parts of the north. We have Met Office yellow warnings in place. That's because of this area of low pressure deepening, intensifying as it moves to the north of Scotland. Look at the squeeze in the isobars. Those winds really picking up, especially through Friday morning. More on that in a moment. Let's get through the rest of today. As I said, a lot of cloud out there. Some drizzly conditions over parts of eastern England, clearing away, the odd spot of drizzle elsewhere, but also something a bit brighter developing. Parts of East Wales, northeast England may well see some sunny spells before more rain pushes back into Northern Ireland. It's pretty mild out there today, double digits almost across the board, and with a bit of brightness we could get into the teens. During this evening, that rain is going to spread from Northern Ireland into western Scotland, where it will last all night. The rain getting heavier and heavier through the night as that low pressure moves in. The winds also then steadily increasing, really picking up after midnight across the northwest. Further south, well, it'll get a bit breezy. It stays cloudy. Look at these overnight temperatures, very mild indeed. We won't feel mild tomorrow in the winds. Now, those winds really whipping up tomorrow morning across Scotland initially, but also down across parts of northern England. Gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, likely to cause some disruption, particularly for high-sided vehicles, but could all cause some flying debris, certainly some disruption to the transport networks. Planes, flights may be cancelled. So a very blustery day across the north with showers in the far north. Again, further south, many places just dry and cloudy, but it will be windier than today. And we could at times see a little bit of rain in the southwest. Another very mild day across the south. Further north, it will be a colder day, despite a bit more sunshine, but obviously feeling a lot colder with those winds. Now, those winds will be easing through the afternoon and into the evening. A bit more rain coming into the northwest as we go through Friday evening. More details on the weather warnings on the Met Office website. Goodbye.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 2.